My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. There is a reason your eyes landed here instead of somewhere else. Thousands of voices compete for your attention every day, yet somehow, at this exact moment, your heart became still enough to hear this one. You were not forced here. You were guided here. What you are about to hear is not presented as a prophecy or a certainty about your future. It is a fictional story told through the voice of heaven, created to encourage hope, reflection, and faith. Listen carefully, because every word carries a purpose inside this story. Have you noticed how certain moments in life seem ordinary until suddenly they become unforgettable? A single conversation. A single message. A single unexpected silence. Sometimes an entire season changes because of one decision that almost went unnoticed. That is where this story begins. There is movement that cannot be seen with human eyes. There are emotions hidden behind smiles, prayers whispered without sound, and tears that never reach another person's face. Somewhere within this story, a soul is searching for courage. Somewhere, someone wishes they could explain what has been locked inside their heart for far too long. Perhaps you have sensed it already. Perhaps there have been little moments that made no sense. A name appearing unexpectedly. A memory returning when you thought it was gone forever. A feeling that someone was thinking about you even though no message arrived. Small moments like these often pass unnoticed, yet in stories such as this, they become the beginning of something much greater. Do not hurry past these words. Every sentence is opening another door. The silence you have been trying to understand may not be empty after all. Imagine standing beside a quiet lake before sunrise. The surface appears perfectly still, but beneath it thousands of tiny currents are moving in different directions. Human hearts can be like that. Outwardly calm. Inwardly overwhelmed. A person may appear certain while secretly wrestling with questions they cannot answer aloud. Within this fictional message, there is someone who has carried words they wanted to speak for longer than anyone realizes. Not because they wished to hide. Not because they stopped caring. But because fear has a remarkable way of convincing people that waiting is safer than speaking. Yet waiting changes people. Silence changes people. And sometimes the greatest distance between two hearts is not measured in miles but in unspoken truth. Listen carefully. The story has only just begun. There comes a moment in every meaningful relationship when pretending becomes impossible. Masks become too heavy. Excuses lose their strength. The heart grows tired of protecting itself from the very thing it longs to embrace. This is that moment. Not necessarily today. Not necessarily tomorrow. But within the unfolding of this story, a turning point has already begun. Can you feel the tension building? Something has already shifted, although almost nobody notices it. The world continues moving exactly as it always has. Cars travel down familiar roads. Clocks continue ticking. Morning becomes afternoon. Afternoon becomes evening. Yet beneath ordinary routines, extraordinary decisions quietly take shape. The most life-changing moments rarely announce themselves with thunder. Often they arrive disguised as ordinary days. Perhaps that is why so many people miss them. But not today. Not within this story. Today you are invited to slow your thoughts. Take a deeper breath. Let your heart become quieter than your worries. Because sometimes answers arrive only after the noise fades. The fictional soul at the center of this story has spent countless nights replaying conversations that never happened. They imagined saying everything honestly. They imagined explaining what was misunderstood. They imagined admitting what pride refused to confess. Every time they gathered courage, something interrupted them. Fear whispered, "What if it's too late? What if they no longer care? What if everything changes once the truth is spoken?" Those questions became walls. Invisible. Powerful. Comfortable. Until one day, the walls themselves became more painful than honesty. That is where heaven's perspective enters this fictional story. Not to force anyone's choices. Not to guarantee an outcome. But to remind every listening heart that courage often begins exactly where certainty ends. You may have believed silence always means absence. Sometimes silence means preparation. You may have believed waiting always means rejection. Sometimes waiting becomes the place where understanding quietly matures. You may have believed unanswered questions always carry hopeless endings. Sometimes unanswered questions exist only because the final chapter has not yet been written. Do not leave yet. There is another layer you have not seen. Imagine an old cathedral filled with soft morning light. Dust dances through beams of sunlight while everything appears motionless. Yet every tiny particle is moving. That is how unseen hope often works. Invisible. Gentle. Constant. The heart in this story has begun noticing little reminders that refuse to disappear. A familiar song. A place connected to old memories. Words spoken by strangers that somehow sound deeply personal. Dreams that fade upon waking yet leave behind emotions impossible to explain. Coincidences? Perhaps. Or perhaps stories become meaningful because ordinary moments invite extraordinary reflection. The important thing is not whether every sign has supernatural meaning. The important thing is what those moments awaken inside a person. Hope. Reflection. The courage to become honest. Within this story, honesty is approaching faster than anyone expects. Yet honesty has a price. It asks people to lay down pride. It asks them to admit mistakes. It asks them to stop pretending they were never hurt. It asks them to speak gently instead of defensively. Few people choose that path willingly. Which is why the next decision becomes so important. Listen. There is another scene unfolding. Picture someone sitting alone after everyone else has gone to sleep. The room is quiet. Their phone rests beside them. Several messages have already been written. Several messages have already been deleted. They stare at a blank screen. Not because they lack words. Because every word suddenly feels too small. How do you summarize months of emotion inside one sentence? How do you explain silence without sounding distant? How do you admit longing without appearing weak? The cursor keeps blinking. Waiting. Patiently. As though time itself has paused. One sentence appears. Deleted. Another appears. Deleted. Finally. Nothing. Only silence. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is the final breath before courage finally speaks. There is something else you should notice. Throughout this story, heaven never rushes broken hearts. Seeds grow beneath soil long before flowers appear. Sunrises begin while darkness still covers the earth. Music exists inside an instrument before anyone plays the first note. Transformation often begins long before visible evidence appears. Remember that. Because the next part of this journey depends on understanding one simple truth. Not everything meaningful happens where human eyes are looking. Some of life's greatest victories begin inside invisible decisions. A forgiven memory. A softened heart. A surrendered fear. An unexpected prayer. These moments rarely become headlines. Yet they quietly reshape entire futures. Within this fictional message, someone has reached that invisible crossroads. They cannot continue pretending nothing matters. Something inside them keeps whispering. Speak. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Soon. Very soon. But another voice answers. What if speaking changes everything? The whisper replies. Perhaps everything needs to change. Those words echo through every quiet place of the soul. Perhaps everything needs to change. Not through destruction. Not through fear. Through truth. Gentle truth. Healing truth. Patient truth. Truth spoken with kindness. Can you sense how close the story is moving toward its next revelation? Stay with it. The greatest moments are rarely the loudest. They often arrive in whispers. Another sunrise approaches. Another opportunity waits just beyond the horizon. Someone who believed they had endless time is beginning to realize time is precious. Not because tomorrow is promised to disappear, but because opportunities lose strength when ignored forever. The heart grows heavier each time love remains unspoken. Regret becomes louder each time honesty is postponed. Yet hope refuses to leave. Hope quietly lights another candle even after the room has grown dark. Hope gently reminds every weary traveler that one conversation can change an entire journey. Within this story, heaven watches patiently. Not with anger. Not with pressure. But with compassion. Because growth cannot be forced. Only invited. The invitation has already been extended. The question is no longer whether the invitation exists. The question is whether someone will finally answer it. And that answer is closer than either heart realizes. But before those hidden words are finally spoken, before the silence breaks, before the message that has remained trapped inside one trembling heart finally reaches its destination, Something completely unexpected is about to happen. It is the one moment neither person anticipated. The one moment that will make every unanswered question suddenly matter in a way neither could have imagined. And when that moment arrives, nothing about this story will feel ordinary anymore. My beloved child, do not look away now. The story has reached a place where even the smallest choice carries extraordinary weight. What seemed distant is beginning to draw near. What once felt hidden beneath layers of uncertainty is quietly rising toward the surface. In this fictional message, heaven invites you to keep listening, because the next moments reveal that the greatest changes rarely begin with loud announcements. They begin with a single heart deciding it can no longer remain silent. Imagine the first light of dawn stretching across a quiet landscape. Nothing appears dramatic. There are no crowds, no celebrations, no sudden flashes across the sky. Yet everything is changing. Darkness slowly gives way to light. Colors that were invisible only moments before begin to awaken. The world itself seems to breathe again. So it is with the human heart. Transformation often arrives so gently that people fail to recognize it until they look back and realize everything has become different. The soul at the center of this story has entered that quiet sunrise. For so long they believed that waiting would protect them. Waiting felt safer than vulnerability. Waiting seemed wiser than risking disappointment. They convinced themselves that another day would always come, that another opportunity would surely appear. Yet every passing day left a question growing louder inside them. What if today was the moment I should have spoken? That question followed them everywhere. It followed them through ordinary conversations. It lingered during quiet evenings. It echoed through sleepless nights. Even moments of laughter could not completely silence it. Because truth has a remarkable way of returning until it is finally acknowledged. Within this fictional journey, heaven does not accuse this person for their hesitation. Instead, heaven patiently watches as courage slowly begins to outweigh fear. Compassion never rushes healing. It understands how deeply disappointment can shape a person's choices. It understands how old wounds sometimes convince people that protecting themselves is wiser than opening their hearts again. But there comes a point when protection quietly becomes a prison. Walls that were built to keep pain away begin keeping hope away as well. That realization changes everything. Perhaps you have noticed moments in your own life when something inside you whispered that it was time to stop hiding behind yesterday's fears. Whether or not this story reflects your own experience, let it remind you that hope often grows strongest where honesty finally begins. The person in this story starts noticing something impossible to ignore. Every attempt to move forward without speaking leaves them feeling incomplete. Every distraction fades. Every excuse sounds weaker than before. The heart refuses to cooperate with denial. It keeps returning to the same thought. I cannot keep pretending these words do not exist. That realization is not dramatic. It is sacred. Not because it guarantees a particular ending, but because it marks the beginning of genuine courage. Far away, another heart carries its own questions. This second soul does not possess every answer either. They have wondered whether silence meant indifference. They have questioned whether forgotten promises still mattered. There were moments they almost convinced themselves to close the chapter completely. Yet every time they reached that conclusion, an unexpected memory returned. A smile. A conversation. A simple act of kindness. Something small. Something almost forgotten. Yet powerful enough to keep hope alive one more day. Neither heart realizes how closely their journeys are beginning to intersect. This is where the story becomes even more mysterious. Not because invisible forces remove human choice, but because ordinary events begin aligning in remarkable ways. A familiar place appears unexpectedly. A conversation with a stranger plants a meaningful thought. An old photograph is discovered. A forgotten journal is opened. A melody from another season fills the room. None of these moments forces a decision. Yet together they become gentle reminders that unfinished stories often continue calling until they are finally understood. Stay with this message. Another layer is unfolding. The fictional archangel watches over the story with quiet compassion, not speaking through thunder, but through peace that steadily replaces confusion. There is no pressure. No fear. Only a calm invitation toward truth. Do not allow fear to become your permanent language. Those words echo softly through the heart of the one who has remained silent. Fear once sounded convincing. Now it sounds tired. Fear once seemed wise. Now it seems lonely. Because fear can imagine endless reasons to remain still, but hope continues asking one simple question. What if honesty brings healing? That question cannot be ignored forever. The person finally begins writing again. Not because they have found perfect words. Because imperfect honesty is becoming stronger than perfect silence. Their hands tremble slightly. The first sentence appears. Then disappears. Another sentence replaces it. This one remains. They read it. Erase half. Write again. There is no certainty. Only sincerity. And sincerity carries a quiet strength that polished speeches often lack. While this unfolds, something unexpected begins happening within the other heart. Without knowing why, they become unusually reflective. They think about moments they believed were finished. Questions they stopped asking begin returning. Not with anxiety. With curiosity. Almost as if life itself is gently inviting them to reconsider what they thought they already understood. The distance between them remains. Yet emotionally, something is drawing closer. In this fictional story, heaven reminds every listener that understanding often arrives before visible change does. That is why patience matters. Not passive waiting. Hopeful patience. The kind of patience that prepares rather than gives up. The kind of patience that allows wisdom to replace impulsive reactions. The fictional archangel walks through the quiet places of this story like morning light entering an ancient sanctuary. No doors are forced open. No hearts are compelled. Instead, every soul is gently reminded that truth spoken with humility carries extraordinary power. One heartfelt sentence can accomplish what years of silence never could. One sincere apology can begin rebuilding bridges that pride could never repair. One honest confession can release burdens carried far too long. As these thoughts settle, another realization arrives. The message waiting to be spoken is not only about affection. It is about understanding. About misunderstandings that quietly multiplied because assumptions replaced conversations. About moments when both people believed the other understood, while neither truly did. How often does that happen? How many relationships slowly drift apart, not because love disappeared, but because honesty arrived too late? Within this story, that pattern is finally being challenged. The silence has reached its limit. The heart knows it. The spirit senses it. Even ordinary moments seem to whisper the same invitation. No more hiding. Still, one final obstacle remains. It is not another person. It is not circumstance. It is not distance. It is the quiet fear that says, if I reveal everything, what if I am no longer accepted? That fear has guarded countless hearts throughout history. Yet courage answers gently. If you never reveal your true heart, how will it ever truly be known? Those words settle deeply. The room grows still. Outside, evening begins replacing daylight. Inside, the fictional soul realizes that this night cannot end the same way previous nights did. Something must change. Not because destiny demands it. Because honesty deserves an opportunity. The phone rests nearby once again. The unfinished message still waits. This time, however, there is no frantic deleting. No endless hesitation. Only quiet breathing. The person closes their eyes for a brief moment. Not asking for certainty. Only asking for courage. And somehow, that courage begins arriving. Not as overwhelming confidence. As peaceful clarity. Enough clarity to write one more sentence. Then another. Then another. Each word feels lighter than the one before. Years of guarded emotion slowly transform into simple honesty. There are no dramatic promises. No impossible declarations. Only truth. Gentle. Respectful. Real. Unknown to them, another heart is experiencing a quiet moment at that very same time. They pause unexpectedly. Almost as if they sense something changing beyond what their eyes can see. They cannot explain it. Neither can anyone else. But they stop what they are doing. They look toward the window. The evening sky glows with colors that seem almost symbolic inside this fictional story. For one brief moment, everything becomes wonderfully still. It feels as though the entire story is holding its breath. Because the message that has remained hidden for so long is no longer trapped inside silence. It is finally ready to leave the safety of the heart that carried it. Only one small action remains. One final moment. One quiet decision. A single touch that cannot be taken back. And just as trembling fingers begin moving toward that final step, someone entirely unexpected appears, carrying a piece of the story that neither heart knew existed. Everything pauses. The next revelation changes the direction of the entire journey. But that secret has not yet been revealed.